اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله، والصلاة والسلام على إمام القبلتين ونبي الحرمين وأفضل الثقلين وجد الحسن والحسين، الذي سمي في السماء بأحمد وفي الأرض بأبي القاسم محمد، وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين الصادقين، والذين ذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. اللهم صل وسلم وزد وبارك على صاحب الدعوة النبوية والسولة الحيدرية والإسمة الفاطمية والحلم الحسنية والشجاعة الحسينية والإبادة السجادية والمآثر الباقرية والآثار الجعفرية والعلوم الكاذمية والحجج الردوية والجود الثقفية والنقاوة النكبية والحيبة العسكرية والغيبة الإلهية. اللهم عجل فرجه وساهل مخرجه. أما بعد، فقد قال الله في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن هدى للناس والبينات من الهدى والفرقان. صدق الله العلي العظيم. For the love of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam, sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. For the love of Fatimatu Zahra in particular, a second salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. For the hastening of the reappearance of the master of our time, a louder salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. When one examines the sermon of Rasulullah given upon the final day of Sha'ban, in introduction of this holy month of Shahr Ramadan, we find that one of the ideals which is emphasized within that sermon, within this month, is the recitation of the Quran. For example, the Prophet of God in that sermon, he says, وَمَنْ تَلَا فِيهِ آيَةً مِنَ الْقُرْآنِ, that within this month of Shahru Ramadan, the person who recites one verse of the Quran, كَانَ لَهُ مِثْلُ أَجْرِ مَنْ خَتَمَ الْقُرْآنِ فِي غَيْرِهِ مِنَ الشُّهُورِ, that person who recites one verse of the Quran in Shahr Ramadan, it's as if he has completed the entire Quran. You see, if I were to ask many people that what comes to your mind when I say Shahr Ramadan, you find that the majority of people, they will say that Sawm and fasting is the first thing that they think of when we say Shahr Ramadan. As in, when the month of Ramadan is coming, the majority of preparation we make is for our suhoor and for our iftar and to be able to fast within this month. But when you look at the description that Allah gives within the Quran of the month of Shahr Ramadan, Allah doesn't describe this as the month of fasting necessarily. When you look at the description of Allah in the Quran, Allah says, Shahr Ramadan alladhi unzila fihi al-Quran. In other words, when Allah gives a description to this month, He gives one description and one description only. That He says that this month is the month where the Quran was revealed. And this is why in a famous tradition from Imam Muhammad al-Baqir salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, Imam Muhammad al-Baqir in a famous tradition he says, لِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ رَبِيعٍ وَرَبِيعُ الْقُرْآنِ شَهْرَ رَمَضَانِ, that every single thing has a springtime, and the spring of the Quran is Shahru Ramadan. In other words, in the springtime, that vegetation which is dead, that vegetation, it comes back to life. Over here, the Imam is saying that the spring of the Quran is Shahr Ramadan. Without a doubt, the Quran is more alive than you and I. Because that entity which contains truth and realities, that entity is truly alive. So if the Quran, it remains alive, why is it that the Imam is saying that the spring of the Quran is Shahru Ramadan? In other words, what comes back to life is our relationship with the Quran within this holy month. And that's why when you look at the Quran and the reality of the Quran, you find that the reality of the Quran has been described as a mu'jiza and a miracle. A mu'jiza in Islamic thought is something outside of the apparent cause and effect which gives proof to the prophethood of a prophet. When you look at each of the Anbiya, you find that they were sent with miracles, but those miracles were according to that time period. For example, in the time period of Nabi Yusuf, you find that the art form of the time was the interpretation of dreams. So when we look in the Quran, we find that Nabi Yusuf had the ability to interpret dreams like no other. In the time period of Musa, we find magic was the art form of the time. So what does Allah give Musa? Allah gives Musa that asa that becomes a snake. And Allah gives Musa that al-yadul bayda, that luminous hand. In the time period of Isa, we find that medicine was at its peak. So Isa is able to heal the blind and cure the leper and bring the dead back to life. But over here the question arises that what was that art form in the time of Rasulullah? And what is the nature of the miracle of Rasulullah known as the Quran? Because there is a difference between the prophethood of every other Nabi and Rasulullah. Rasulullah's message and guidance was until the day of judgment. In other words, if the message and the guidance of Rasulullah was until the day of judgment, then the miracle of Rasulullah has to be until the day of judgment. If you wanted to see the staff of Musa, you had to be there at a particular time and place. And if you want to see Isa bring the dead back to life, you have to be there at a particular time and place. But the miracle of Rasulullah is that miracle which sits within our shelves, that miracle which is in front of us. In other words, the miracle of the Quran is this, is that when you look at every single language within the world, you find that there are two categories within that language. Either you have prose or you have poetry. Prose is straightforward speech, what we call in Arabic nathar. And poetry is what we call nadam. Every language, either it is straightforward speech or it's poetry, there's no third category. But the miracle of the Arabic language is that there were not two categories within Arabic. In Arabic, there were three categories. One was poetry, one was prose, and the third was Quran. Because neither was the Quran nathar, and neither was it nadam, neither was it prose, neither was it poetry. You find the qualities of both, they come within the Quran. You know, in the time period of Rasulullah, there was a famous poet by the name of Sha'sha. Sha'sha wouldn't speak all year round. This individual, he would speak once a year and he would present his poetry, because he would say that if I'm a person who's kathratul kalam, I'm a person who's always speaking, there will be times when my speech has value and there will be times where my speech doesn't have value. They say that when people would see Sha'sha walking, They would take their poetry and without saying anything, he would correct the meters of the poetry and he would make it stronger. One day an individual decides to take Surat al-Kawthar towards Sha'sha. When Sha'sha, he sees Surat al-Kawthar, that individual who wouldn't speak all year, he looks at it once. He looks at it twice. He reads the lines. It says, Inna a'tainaka al-Kawthar. فَصَلِّ لِرَبِّكَ وَانْهَرْ إِنَّ شَانِئَكَ هُوَ الْأَبْتَرِ. The moment he reads these lines, he says, مَا هَذَا مِنْ كَلَامِ الْبَشَرِ بَلْ هُوَ فَوْقَ مِنْ كَلَامِ الْبَشَرِ. He says that this is not the speech of any ordinary individual, but rather this is above the speech of the common individual. So you find the Quran has a reality. Oftentimes within this month of Shahr Ramadan, our focus is upon the outer form of the Quran. These words of the Quran that we recite or we look at in the Mus'haf, these words are one dimension of the Quran. But the goal is to reach that inner reality of the Quran. That's why Imam Muhammad al-Baqir salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, Imam Muhammad al-Baqir would say that the Quran has a dhahir and it has a batin. That the Quran has an outward and it has an inward. And the inward has an inward all the way up to 70 inner realities. Then he would say that if you want to know the outer of the Quran, then it is with us Ahlul Bayt. And if you want to know all 70 of those inner realities, it is with us Ahlul Bayt. You know, they came to Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. When they came to Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq, they said to him, O Imam, on the day of Ghadir, one of the statements of your grandfather Rasulullah was the famous hadith, Inni tarikun fikum al-thaqalain, Kitab Allah wa itrati ahl bayti. That I leave behind two weighty things, the Quran and my progeny. But I have a question for you, O Imam. When your grandfather gave this hadith, it is stated within the reports that the fingers of your grandfather were like this, they weren't like this. You know, in Arabic, each finger has a name, sababa, wusta, all the way down to the final finger. But it's stated within the reports that Rasulullah didn't do this. He used those fingers which were like this. They say to Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq that, O Imam, what is the difference between using these two fingers and using these two fingers? Imam as-Sadiq replies by saying, when you look at these fingers, you notice that one of them is bigger than the other. When my grandfather on the day of Ghadir said, I am leaving behind the Quran and my Ahlul Bayt, he used those two fingers which were parallel to each other. In other words, the reality of the Quran is reflected in Ahlul Bayt and the reality of Ahlul Bayt is reflected within the Quran. And those individuals who are true followers of Ahlul Bayt, they have a relationship with the Quran. Then you know, one of the companions upon the day of Ashura was the companion by the name of Burair ibn Khudair. Burair ibn Khudair was an individual that upon the morning of Ashura, he was seen smiling upon that day. They said to him, Burair, we are in such a difficult moment, you're seen smiling. Burair says that in my youth, I was not a person of this dunya. Do you think in my old age, I'll be such a person? He says the reason I smile is because I see paradise in front of me. But the question is to be asked that how does he reach such a status? When you look at the Tabari in his Tarikh, when he writes about Burair ibn Khudair, he says that this individual was from amongst those who are considered Sayyidul Qurra bil Kufa. That he is considered amongst those who are the heads of the reciters of the Quran in Kufa. Now, I'll give you another example of how the companions of Ahlul Bayt had a relationship with the Quran. There's an individual who says, he narrates this incident that he was within the middle of the desert. The narrator, his name is Abdullah bin Mubarak. He says that when I was in the middle of the desert, I noticed that the lady Fidda, he didn't know who she was at that moment. He says, I noticed there was a lady in the middle of the desert. And to see a lady by herself in the desert as nighttime is approaching is something which is very uncommon. He says, at that moment, I went to go help her. When I went to go help her, I said to her, lady, is there anything that you need? The moment I said that to her, she replies to me by saying, فَقُلْ سَلَامٌ وَسَوْفَ يَعْلَمُونَ. That say salam and soon they should know. She replies with a verse from the Quran. The man says, the moment she recited this verse of the Quran, I knew at that moment she wants me to say salam towards her. After that, I say that, is there anything do you need? Are you lost at that moment? She says, وَمَن يَهْدِ اللَّهُ فَمَا لَهُ مِن مُضِلٍّ. The one whom Allah guides can never be lost. He says, based upon the context of the verse, I understood that she's telling me that she's lost. But the strange thing is, I asked her 2 questions. Both of those questions she replied from the Quran. So I began to think to myself that, is this a human being or is this a jinn? So I said to her, are you a human or are you from amongst the jinn? She replies immediately by saying, Ya Bani Adam, khudu zinatakum inda kulli masjid. That, O son of Adam, adorn yourself when you go to the place of worship. Because she said Banu Adam and the children of Adam, I knew at that moment she is telling me that she is from amongst the human beings. I said to her, where are you coming from? She says, Ulaika yunaduna min makanim ba'id. That they are individuals who call from a far off place. He says, I understood by that verse that she is coming from somewhere far. Then after that he says to her, where are you going? She says, Walillahi ala nasi hijjul bayt. That for Allah it is incumbent upon man to go to Hajj. He says, from this ayat I understand that she was going towards Hajj and she got lost. So I said to her that, how long have you been lost? She says, وَلَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضَ وَمَا بَيْنَهُمَا فِي سِتَّةِ أَيَّامٍ. That Allah created the heavens and the earth and everything in between in 6 days. I understood that she's been lost for 6 days. I said to her that, are you hungry? Do you need anything? She replies by saying, وَمَا جَعَلْنَاهُمْ جَسَدًا لَا يَأْكُلُونَ الطَّعَامِ. That we didn't make them bodies that don't need food. In other words, yes, I'm hungry. Yes, I need food. So he gives her food at that moment. Then he says that, listen, there is a caravan we see in the distance. Why don't you run and catch up to that caravan and maybe they'll take you to your destination? You know what she replies by saying? She says, لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. That Allah does not burden a soul more than what it can handle. In other words, I don't have the capability to run and join that caravan. The man says, very well, then why don't you come upon my camel and sit behind me? She says, لو كان فيهما آلهة إلا الله لفسدتا. That if there was a Lord besides Allah, there would be fasad and corruption. In other words, you are my non-mahram. If you sit on the same horse, camel as me, then this would be corruption at this moment. The man says, very well, I will get off the camel and you sit upon the camel. The moment she gets upon the camel, she says, Subhanalladhi sakhara lana hada wa ma kunna lahu muqrinin. That free from defects is that Allah who has made this subservient for us. As they're going in this journey, it stated, the narrator, he says that we saw 4 young men from a distance. And it seemed as if this lady knew who these men are. So I said to her that, who are they? She says, وَمَا مُحَمَّدٌ إِلَّا الرَّسُولُ يَا دَاوُودْ إِنَّا جَعَلْنَاكَ خَلِيفَةً فِي الْأَرْضِ يَا يَحْيَا خُذِ الْكِتَابَ بِالْقُوَّةِ Ya Musa inni ana Allah. She takes 4 names, Yahya, Dawood, Musa, Muhammad. And you find that when these 4 names are taken, the man says, who are these 4 individuals? She says, Al-malu wal-banun min zinat al-hayat ad-dunya. That your wealth and your children are from the adornments of this world. The man says, I understood these were her children. And after that, she says to her children, Ya abate ista'jirhu, that give this man a reward, referring to the lines that the daughters of Shoaib used towards Prophet Musa. And the moment that her children give a reward to that man, she says, Wallahu yuda'ifu liman yasha, that Allah increases for the one whom He wants, and the children knew to give more towards that man. In other words, that man is shocked that we had an entire dialogue, and this lady recited nothing but the Quran. He says that, who is this lady? The children reply by saying, this is our mother Fidda, the servant of Fatima, the daughter of Rasulullah, and it's been 20 years and she has spoken nothing but the Quran. You see, an individual can only have that relationship with the Quran when they've understood the reality of the Quran. And if you want to understand the reality of the Quran, one of the most important sources to do so is the dua that Imam Zainul Abidin would recite upon completing the Quran. This dua, which is found in As-Sahifatu Sajjadiyah, if you look at the lines within this dua, each of these lines explains that what is the true nature of the Quran. For example, the Imam, he says that Allahumma innaka a'antani ala khatmil kitabika alladhi anzaltahu nuran. That, oh Allah, you have helped me to complete this book which you have sent down as a nur and a light. In other words, the nature of the Quran is what the nature of nur and light is. In the way there is physical light, you find that there is light at the metaphysical level as well. In other words, in the way physical light allows us to know where we are going, it allows us to differentiate the path in darkness. This is that nur, that when you have trials and tribulations and you do not know where the path of haqq and truth it lies, you find this is that nur and that light which allows you to know that pathway. You know, the Quran, it says, وَلَا رَطْبٍ وَلَا يَعْبِسٍ إِلَّا فِي كِتَابٍ مُبِينٍ, that there is nothing wet, nor is there anything dry, except for it's within this manifest book. In other words, what this verse is showing, the principles of all of our solutions at the very minimum level, those principles are found within the Quran. But to access those principles, you find that an individual must undergo a process as well. Because many of us, when we recite the Quran in Shahr Ramadan, our only goal is to recite one juz, one portion of the day, and to finish this Quran within 30 days, and we don't have any further goals. But when you look at how Rasulullah would recite the Quran, for example, we have a tradition that says that Rasulullah would recite 10 ayat and 10 verses at a time. In other words, when you pace your recitation of the Quran, at that moment an individual is able to reflect and ponder over the realities of the Quran. That's why the Quran says, أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ أَمْ عَلَىٰ قُلُوبِهِمْ أَقْفَالُهَا. The Quran says that when it comes to the Quran, there are two groups of people. Either there are those individuals who ponder over the Quran, or at the second level, there are those individuals whose hearts are locked, that there is no third group. And to reach that realm, you find it requires pondering and deliberation. In other words, when Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam would recite the Quran, they would take an active approach to reciting it. You know, there's a tradition of Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. Imam as-Sadiq in that tradition would say that recite the Quran as if it's being revealed upon you. Whenever Imam al-Hasan would recite the Quran, and there would be those verses that say, Ya ayyuhalladina amanu, O you who believe, Imam al-Hasan twice would say labbaik, that, oh Allah, I'm here at that moment. And it's this active approach that allows one to be submerged within the realities of the Quran. Because this is that book which was sent as a guidance for mankind. And I've said this before and I'll say it again, that when you look at all of the heavenly books, the Bible, the Torah, whichever book it may be, or whichever book that any religion holds on to, there is no book which is addressed all of humanity as a whole except the Quran. No other book has used this line, Ya ayyuhan nas, O mankind, except the Quran. In other words, what this goes to show is that the universality of the Quran is something which can benefit anyone, but at the same time, when one is able to submerge themselves within the Quran, you find that they're able to benefit from the reality of the Quran at a higher level. And when you look at Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam, and we look at the events of the night of Ashura, it's stated that upon that night, the Quran was being recited in such unison, it's as if it was the sound of the buzzing of the bees upon that night. You see, what was the night of Laylatul Ashura? It's stated upon that night, Sayyid al-Shuhada, he lists the names of all of the Shuhada and the martyrs. And as he's listing the names one by one, it's stated that Qasim, the son of Imam al-Hassan, would wait for his name to be called. But as the name of Qasim isn't called, Qasim notices that even the name of Ali Asghar is called. So he comes to his uncle and he says, "Oh, my uncle, is my name not upon this list?" You know, Imam al-Hussein says a line that he only says to Qasim. You know what the Imam says? The Imam says, "Kayf al-maut indak?" That how do you find death? You know, Sheikh Ja'far al-Shushtari would explain why Imam al-Hussein only said this to Qasim. You know what Qasim says? He says, "Al-maut ahla min al-asal." To me, death is sweeter than honey. And the Imam says, "Oh Qasim, even you'll be martyred tomorrow." Qasim says, "Oh my uncle, are they going to come towards the tents because you mentioned the name of your infant Ali Asghar?" The Imam says, "Oh Qasim, a time will come where I'll ask for water, but instead of water, an arrow would go towards Asghar." You know, on the day of Ashura, Qasim, he would wait. One after another, Banu Hashim would go, Qasim would wait. But one point it came where Qasim, he goes to his mother. His mother looks at Qasim. Farwa says, "Oh Qasim, take this letter which your father had written for this day." Qasim, he takes that letter to Sayyid al-Shuhada. You know, the Maqtal doesn't say what's written in the letter, but Sayyid ibn Tawus says that the moment Sayyid al-Shuhada reads that letter, he begins to cry so much with Qasim, فَغَشِيَ عَلَيْهِمَا, both of them fall unconscious in that tent. It's stated, Qasim, he goes to the battlefield, he begins to fight. You know what Sheikh Ja'far Shushtari says? Sheikh Ja'far Shushtari answers the question that why is it only Qasim was asked, "How do you find death?" You know what Sheikh Ja'far Shushtari says? He says that when Qasim was fighting, a point had come where the sandal of Qasim was caught upon the horse. And when the sandal of Qasim was caught on the horse, the body of Qasim would drag through the plains of Karbala, and the body of Qasim would break into pieces. Sheikh Ja'far Shushtari says that every other shaheed, their body was trampled after they passed away. But Qasim was alive. The body of Qasim would be trampled into pieces. You know, every shaheed would send their salam to Sayyid al-Shuhada. But Qasim doesn't send his salam. He says, "Ya Amma adrikni," that, "Oh my uncle, help me." You know, Sayyid al-Shuhada, at the body of each shaheed, he would say a line. At the body of Ali Akbar, he says, "Ala dunya ba'daka al-afaya Akbar," that, "Oh Akbar, after you may the world become dust, O Ali Akbar." Akbar. At the body of Abbas, he says, Al-an inkasara dahri, now my back has been broken. But at the body of Qasim, Sayyid al-Shuhada says, O Qasim, what will I tell your mother that you were asking your uncle for help, but he wasn't able to help you, O Qasim? Ala la'natullah ala al-qawm al-dhalimeen. We say, Ya Allah, through the right of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad, wherever the followers of Ahlul Bayt are in difficulty, help them. Wherever they're sick and ailing, cure them. Ya Allah, allow us to walk upon the footsteps of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad, and grant us the ziyarah of the qubur of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. There is a brother in our community who is ill. We raise our hands in dua for him before we recite Surah Al-Fatiha for the list of marhumeen. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Amma yujibul mudarra idha da'a. Amma yujibul. One more time all together. Amma yujibul mudarra idha da'ahu wa yakshifu su'. We ask you the right of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad that you cure this brother of his difficulties and of his illness. For Mirza Ahmad Ali, Begum Pasha, Mir Ali Ahmad, Zahra Begum, Mirza Muhammad Ali, Non-Hal Begum, Sayyid Zahid Ali Zadi, Zahra Begum, Sabtan Ali Mirza, Amtul Rabab Nakwi, Qamar Jahan, Ja'far Ali Shah, Sayyid Babar Ali Rizvi, Tahira Begum, Mutahira Begum, Mir Zakir Ali Begum Jan, Mir Asghar Ali, as well as your own marhumeen. Rahimallahu man qara Surah Al-Fatiha. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin.